Well, hello and welcome to the APAC edition of the Top 100 LinkedIn Live panel discussions. My name is Siobhan Hady, and alongside Gladwin Mendez of Fisher Funds, we will be hosting today's discussion, and I would really like to thank you for joining us. So over the next 45 minutes, we will be sitting down with a number of our top 100 members who were recently featured within Corinium's Top 100 Innovators in Data and Analytics for 2022. And if you haven't yet seen who else is featured, then you can download a copy of the report right now. It's actually available within this event description. So now on to the discussion at hand. I would really like to welcome our esteemed panel. The first person that you are going to be hearing from is Gladwin Mendez, who is... Welcome, Gladwin. Gladwin is the Data and Technology Operations Officer from Fisher Funds. So, Gladwin, do you want to give us a little bit of an intro to yourself?
Yeah, so like you've already given a great intro, I'm the Data and Technology Operations Officer at Fisher Funds, responsible for the entire data lifecycle from management, governance, and insights. So yeah, and great to be on this panel and co-hosting with you, Siobhan.
Thank you. Excellent. I'm now really pleased to introduce you to Chris Dolman, who is the Executive Manager for Data and Algorithmic Ethics from IAG. Welcome, Chris. Can you tell us a bit about what you've been doing?
Sure, and thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm Chris. I work at IAG, which is a large general insurance company. I'm an actuary by background. Did all the sort of traditional jobs that actuaries might do in insurance companies. And then over the last little while, I've been involved in this sort of unusual sounding job, which you just described. So basically, when we do new and interesting things with data, with algorithms and what have you, we need to make sure that those algorithms are operating responsibly and ethically and are designed to do the right thing and not do horrible things. And so my role is there to make sure that when we do these sorts of projects, we're thinking about the broader ethics of what we might be doing, putting controls in place and risk management in place so that things go right and don't go wrong. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Chris. Welcome to the panel. And we have also joining us Brett Wooley, who is from QBE Insurance. And his title is Head of Data Strategy and Governance. Welcome, Brett. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity today to join the panel, which is always good fun. My background is probably 30 odd years in technology and data, in the last decade predominantly in data. I view my role as fundamentally changing the capability and culture of the organisation to drive value from the data that we have through customer service, efficiency, decision quality, and managing our reputational risk. So it's very much on how do we set up the organisation to use its finite asset of data to maximum value.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, Brett. And last but by no means least, we have Bhavika Undantkat, who is coming to us from Energy Australia. And Bhavika, who is the Head of Data Governance and Knowledge Management. Welcome, Bhavika. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. I'm Bhavika. I've been working with Energy Australia as a head of data governance and knowledge management. So I've been working for past 15 years in various aspects of data analytics, and data strategy. So this time I have focused on data governance. Having said that, helping the whole data strategy and the other areas of data in check. So that's something that I have picked up. And also often the knowledge management gets ignored. So this is where in my role, I try to bring all the knowledge that we gather through various aspects of the data lifecycle and at the same time keep them in check using the governance hat. Thank you.
Fantastic. Welcome. Well, that is our panel. We also, but I didn't mention this at the top of the call, but Gladwin Mendez is actually on our advisory board as well. So my first question is actually for Gladwin. How did you choose the top 100 innovators? Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Ooh, that's a tough question. It's a tough one. And like a lot of work went into it, and it was a global effort. So as you've touched upon, Siobhan, I'm one of, at that point, 30 global advisory members for the Corinium Business of Data panel, right? So we work closely and tirelessly with the Corinium team, collating all those amazing entries that came through, right? And so the key things we were looking for were, people going the extra mile, those leaders, those people who are just pioneering the latest and greatest technologies, but also people driving foundational activities. And that's why we've got quite a few governance people, ethics, some of these key things, right? So, yeah, we sort of went through those entries together. We kind of ranked them, gave our view on what we thought the top leaders globally were. And I'm really proud of the APAC people who got selected. I was kind of, rooting for good old New Zealand and Australia. So, yay, we got some in there. But yeah, we had an amazing set of entries, and it was hard. Interestingly enough, I almost got banned off LinkedIn because at one point, LinkedIn thought I was a bot, right? Because I was literally opening up LinkedIn profiles going, let me have a look. How does this person interact with the data community, right? So it was a group effort. We had amazing sort of entries, and it was quite tough to select this top sort of 100. But yeah, we got there, and we are where we are today. But it was amazing and a lot of work, but really great at the end of the day.
Fantastic, Gladwin. Thank you so much. The first question that we'd really like to ask the panel is, what do you think it takes to be a successful data leader in 2022?
Oh gosh, shall I start and then maybe others can chip in? Would that be
right ahead?
Go for
I think there's probably three things to mention, and then I'm sure there's probably others that people can throw in. I think the most important thing is probably that you've got to drive teamwork and collaboration across your organization, right, to make things happen. I think if you've got a data-driven project or system that you want to get into market, you're not going to be able to do that on your own. You're going to have to involve a lot of other teams, your frontline teams, your marketing teams, your product teams, your IT function, your risk function. All of these other people probably need to get involved to make things happen, because you've got to get the end-to-end system working right. So sitting in a back office developing some model on your own isn't really going to get you anywhere. So if you're going to be a data leader, you've really got to be that linchpin that sort of holds the whole thing together, I think, to really make things happen. Kind of related to that is you've got to have really clear prioritization, right? Because everyone's got an idea now of a data project, because we've all read stuff in the news about what might be possible. So we've all got bright ideas in our heads. So that means there's like infinite demand and finite capacity on your team to do stuff. And so you've got to get really good at saying no to ideas that maybe aren't as valuable as others and really prioritizing your efforts. And finally, and I would say this obviously, is you've got to be really careful about your risk management, your ethics, and those sorts of aspects, right? We've all seen lots of stories of things that have gone wrong recently. And I think the world's moved on from sort of 5 or 10 years ago. It was excitement over what's possible. Now it's very much not just can I do it, but should I do it? And I think that's a mindset that we all need to have in our businesses. So very important that data professionals and data leaders are aware of some of the risks and managing them effectively in their organizations. I'll probably let others speak now, because that's probably enough for me.
Yeah, and Chris, I'd probably just put a slightly different tangent on two of the things that I think underpin exactly what you said, which was one, I think you do need to have a really deep curiosity. It's really important that you get in and really have an understanding. And the other part of that I think is really critical is you actually understand the business of the organization as much as the business of data. So without those, you're not going to get the collaboration. You're not going to understand the risk. You're not going to understand that. So I do, passionate people who are curious and understand the organization can demonstrate what you talked about to actually make things happen. Bhavika, did you want to?
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you, but I quite align, like in my past experience as well. I have seen that it was quite easy to get along and work with the people when you talk their language, so business. So if you wear that, if you can bridge that gap between the business and the data, that's where the success lies, because that's where you can start to develop that trust that you really know what you're talking about. You know my business, so you're going to really help me to achieve my goals using the data and your data skills. That's the feedback I get. So I quite agree. And Chris, to your point as well, about the ethics, and that has become a huge piece in itself. That's why I was like, I've done data analytics, now the governance aspect, which is where that plays a very key role while you're working as a leader, because you've got so much more data uh, than before, and now to use it properly and appropriately, it has become a key thing for all the leaders in today's world.
Like I think it's amazing that we've got like a recurring theme in the focus of people, which really resonates with me. To what I think is also going to be very critical for successful data leaders in 2022 will be the ability, and again, from people standpoint, being able to clearly articulate and actually deliver on that vision and data strategy, which, as we've touched upon perfectly, must be aligned across strategy, people, process, technology, and data, right? And all the aspects around data governance, data management, insights, machine learning, all of that needs to cut across those. But I touched upon strategy, and then business focus is also the view of not just a micro driver, and we'll touch upon this in the question later. It is very much the macro view and those micro views, and essentially aligning those 5 pillars I've touched upon to really be able to drive that home.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. Next question is, what are the challenges and therefore perhaps the opportunities that you can see on the horizon for you, and what are you getting ready to work through?
Well, I'll take that, and then others can add. I think I'm seeing 3 core challenges that we're trying to work through now. One is the increasing level of regulation and the requirements we have to do for compliance through a number of things. And the consumer data right and those things are just some of the examples which sort of fundamentally shift someone's thinking around data. So I think that's a critical issue. I see environment complexity as the other one that we need to work in. There's an absolute plethora of technologies and opportunities of technologies, but the risk of that, of course, is how do I manage that to deliver value without over complicating the environment. And the third one that we're seeing a fair bit is actually skilled workforce and getting the right people at the right price. And I'm not sure how much that's really driven by the pandemic, but it's certainly the marketplace is pretty hot. So they're probably the 3 core challenges that we are starting to really work through now.
Excellent. Is that a common theme across the panel?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned sort of regulation and what have you, Brett. So I'll just sort of pick up on that. I mean, obviously, we're all in a similar part of the world, but I think no matter where you are in the world, the regulations in this space are just constantly evolving, right? Because we've come from an environment where perhaps the desires of the general public for things like privacy and security and what have you were in advance of the regulations that were already there. So there's been this sort of tendency over the last couple of years to upgrade the regulations no matter where you are in the world. This has been a theme, right? So folks like us have to pay attention to that and work out how to respond. I think there is an opportunity though for us to, particularly in sort of the open data movement, to work out how to sort of maximize the gains from that and minimize the potential hazards, because there certainly are hazards with the sort of open data movement that exists. So we need to sort of work out how to balance that, and I think data leaders can help society work out how to strike that right balance.
Also, one of the challenge that we at our places where we are facing is the talent or the resources available in the market that has become a key for all of a sudden, after post-pandemic, like, during now, specifically managing the budget, getting the resources at a right price and working with them to actually get the delivery. Retention of them has also become a key challenge, because you start something and then within 6 months people are moving jobs, which is becoming very hard to keep the focus, keep the timeline, and do the deliverables as well. So that is one of the key challenges. At the same time, there are so many different tools, and if you train a person, but retaining that person and making sure that person works with you throughout the project, it's becoming really, really hard.
Excellent.
Again, interesting from my point of view is that, again, the sort of macro, socio-tech and economic drivers all sort of coming through. We talked about the sort of sustainability, climate, ESG, is the term that's becoming and having more and more focus, right? The social, the sort of environmental drivers. You just have to look overseas in Russia and see what investment organizations are doing to sort of withdraw their funds from Russian organizations, right? So socially, what's acceptable? Ethics is a big one. Regulation, compliance, privacy, security issues, those things are not going away anytime soon, right? Security comes under my remit in the business. So, look, it's been a scary year for security, and those aren't going to go away. And the more data you have, the cleaner your data is. Imagine if you have a data breach, right? I'm going to be cheeky here in this statement here, and everyone's focused a lot on the digital aspect and the front office side of things, but we touched upon the people aspect in the back office, and the great resignation. So, as the leaders, one of the interesting challenges and opportunities we all face is we've always had a shortage of good data people. But what are we doing as data leaders to retain people, not just within data teams, right? And I'll touch on this later on. But what are we doing in our data, like outside within the wider organization, to help retain employees and go, hey, actually, you might be in the tax team, you're not quite happy with what you're doing. We'll upskill you, empower, and train up people so you get that retention. And again, from an analytics standpoint, big focus on APIs in the front end, but what about business process management in the back end, RPA, making people's lives easy instead of having to do manual forms and print out, when they can go, well, for our clients, they do everything in 2 seconds. Why do I have to put my expense claim through manually and mail it through to my boss, etc.? Yeah. So it's just some of those thinkings in this foundational enablers.
Yeah, and Gladwin, I think that's where a lot of the leadership we can show, which is really how do we. I often talk at QBE that all of our work is the transmission of data between two people. And sometimes in between those two people, some machines have a look at it and make some decisions or drive some stuff. So how do we optimize that to give the people that are there the work that actually only they can do, rather than the work that anyone can do, and use that to sort of drive some of the challenges to workforce, because that also then starts to democratize data across the organization.
Exactly. You touched on a great point, Brett, is cutting out those non-value added activities, right? And, actually we'll have a view that, and I've seen a lot of organizations where countries kind of have horrible processes sometimes. They hate doing it. They want to focus on the insights and making a difference to their clients, not manually handling data and crunching and massaging it to try and get into the model, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where the education that we're trying to drive is, that's what management of data is about. It's not about these black office boffins looking at stuff. There's analytics which can drive an incredible amount of value to the organization and can help. Yeah. But actually the whole organization, whether you want to call it digital or data, sometimes it's very hard to differentiate the language. But it's really about, how do I optimize the work? How do I make that efficient for the organization? How do I make it so it gives the customer the best experience? Yeah. And I've often talked about in data, If I tell you you're over 100 years old, you're going to look at me if I'm silly. If I tell an algorithm you're over 100 years old, you're probably going to decline me for a product. So as we start to look at this, I think this again comes back to some of the both challenges and trends of that's really important for a data leader to understand the business so they can actually have those conversations and have those debates with people around what is the optimum spend, because perfection is not an option, but how do I put the right value on what I'm doing to derive the right investment and bring effectively data up to the same level of management as any other finite resource like capital or people or risks, acceptance, etc.
And building the trust, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I think there's a lot of challenges that are out there in terms of how we do, and I think there's that's become being more complex by some of the trends that we're generally seeing.
That does lead us to our next question, which is the top trends you are seeing in the market today. Any other trends coming through that you're really interested to know more about or exploring with organizations?
I can go first if you like. I mean, I'm just happy that sort of ethics and risk management of data and stuff has now become mainstream. I think when I started in my role 3 or 4 years ago, people sort of looked at me with a blank face as to what I was supposed to be doing sometimes. No one does that anymore. In fact, people approach me almost cold calling me, asking how to set these sorts of things up. So it's a total reversal, which is great to see, because I think it's pretty obvious to everyone now that problems can emerge, not because of bad intent, but just because of, strange things happening when you try and do stuff with data. Sometimes it's a funny world. So you don't have to have bad intent to cause bad outcomes. So putting in the right sort of risk management and ethics considerations over your activities is just essential now. So I'm happy to have been doing it for a while. And I think others are now following suit, which is lovely to see.
I can go next. The smarter and scalable AI is kind of becoming a new trend. So now no more people are, relying on historical data. We all know, due to COVID, all our models and all have been, affected really, really badly. So now what I have seen is, there's a need for AI or machine learning model which are highly adaptable and scalable, and which can work even with a smaller data set, so that the insights and if they want to get some insights out of it, it's much easier, which quite caught my attention. You don't have enough data, but you're still utilizing and getting that insights out to make your decision. It's kind of a new trend which quite fascinates me.
Yeah, and then I think from my perspective, acknowledging what Chris has said already, because I do actually see the whole ethical consideration as whether it's a trend, it's actually a reality. And I know probably, about half of my board level engagement is actually around the conversation about how do we handle ethics from a governance perspective and the challenges that come with that. And so it's a very important topic. I think the other thing that we're seeing a lot of trend more broadly in business, which I think has large implications for data, and that's the growth of ecosystems and the fact that we're going more and more to partnership, externalization of activity, third-party providers. I look at my industry where we've probably had third parties through broker and other things, but it's now becoming much more into service provision and other areas. And the challenge for the organization, it's actually accountability is coming back to the organizations. So how do you manage, how do you make sure the right things happen by the partners you have, and you have a different set of levers and controls? And particularly when you start to look at data where you really don't have the same governance mechanisms that you have internally around projects and other activities, but how do you govern good data practices in third parties, both in the data that you provided, and that's both from a regulatory and, to Chris's point, an ethics point of view. How was that data collected? How was that data provided? And then when we share data with people, how do we are comfortable both regulatory and ethically that what we are sharing is used in the way the organisation would accept under the way it's tried to percentage market? So I think they're the other the areas of trends that we're seeing that are driving behaviour that's quite significant to the organisations.
And you raise a good point, Brett, actually around third parties, again, around the security too, is at the end of the day, and third party risk as a whole, and look at security as a specific area. If you have an issue, is whose fault is that? At the end of the day, the client will see it as yours, and there have been a number of serious breaches due to third parties, and how you manage the risks around that, not just how you collect information and so on too. So yeah.
Excellent.
And I think, but the other one, by the way, I think, and we've touched on it a couple of times, is that I think it's a trend and a huge challenge. Is this explosion in technologies, and that's got, to me, it's got two aspects to it. One is trying to pick winners, and how do you pick the things you want, and what products have what lifespan, and how do you, those things that you think are going to be highly competitive but short term, how do you build them into the organization to throw them away? Which things you think are going to have life? And the other thing, to be brutally honest, that it brings is a whole lot of Monday's experts, of people who've read the paper and read the conversation and seen it. And now, well, you should have a look at this product, or why aren't we using this product? I've heard from someone else it's really good. And there's actually quite a bit of work generated. That's from board down to everyone who's knows someone who's got a product. So I think that's the other sort of trend and challenge that we see in that explosion. And some of that stuff's really good, and you sort of go, I need to use it now because it's going to give me advantage. But how do I use it in a way that if the next best thing comes along that allows me to take rid of it, that I can actually change over time? So there's a lot of sort of what I call multi-horizon planning that you need to do for the things that you want to churn quickly, the things you want to maintain stability because you need control and viewpoint on. So I think that's the other trend that I'm seeing across the industry that we play into quite a bit.
There's another trend that's sort of a reaction to that, I think, Brett, if anything else. So there's a phrase I've been using for a while that I've noticed others have started using recently, which is sort of boring AI, right? So not necessarily picking the most exciting, newest thing that's just been released to try and do your project, but just something that will work sufficiently well, that's well understood, that might be 10 years old, but it doesn't matter. It's still going to get the job done, get it done quickly, satisfactorily, and you can move on to the next project. Because I think you can burn a lot of time and effort exploring brand new things, and maybe the lift is there, maybe it's not, but if you can achieve good outcomes with good enough technology, then that can sometimes get you a long way. So I'm going to suggest that people use the phrase boring AI to describe these things, but it's not boring, because value is surely never boring.
And I think that's the thing, Chris, that and this is why it becomes really important to understand your business and your business drivers, and also understand the people that you're dealing with at the various levels, to understand the motivations, and so you can work those conversations with the motivation of the individuals and the organizational culture in mind, to help them navigate through that too, because at the end of the day, it is about driving value to the organization.
That's right. I mean, we published a case study of sort of what to do with motor total losses in terms of using AI and what have you a year or so ago. And that used like no techniques that were new by any stretch of the imagination, but the value's been tremendous. So, yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Chris, because I think everyone here, as Brett touched upon, has had that executive who comes running down and go, oh my gosh, I just went to this conference and why aren't we doing this? And then you go like, oh, first of all, our data quality is crap, but we don't have this in place and we don't have this people and so on. So I think maybe a trend is like cutting through the hype almost, right? And exactly like you've said, making boring AI. And, I touched upon it around the strategy, is that laser focus on ROI, going, okay, making sure that you don't sell the hype, that you're as realistic as possible with your business cases. Again, Brett touched upon being agile. There's so many new technologies, and even I'm finding it challenging. It's like there's a new technology coming every other week going, hey, look, actually, we're better than these other guys. I think when you build the business case, and I've seen this a number of times, is that it is on key areas, not building in the hype of, oh, we'll get 100% increased sales. It's like, well, how can you tell me hand in heart you'll get 100% increased sales, but you're telling me boring AI, you can do this 10 times quicker. In the back end, we touched on the back office, we'll do a lot quicker, smarter, in a better way. Great. Okay, let's build that in and build that into our business case. And if it happens to have an ROI in increased revenue, great, let's focus on that. But then the interesting question I'd have on most people is how often have you seen after arduous long project goes in that at the end of the project they go, hey guys, let's go calculate the ROI. Did we actually deliver to the business case? That's my open question. I'm not going to answer for anyone, but I'll just go like, how often do you see that?
Do you want to explain the concept?
I think we've certainly talked about value of projects in some of the stuff I've already talked about. So yeah, it's certainly good discipline to do that. I think the challenge for people is always when things fail. It's sort of there's a tendency to bury things under the rug sometimes if projects fail, right? That's just human nature. So we have to try and avoid that and learn from things that have gone bad.
Because you raise a good point, and I come back down to the people aspect, and almost while I've touched upon strategy quite a bit, is a cultural aspect of culture eats strategy for breakfast. Everyone knows that saying. But how do you create an environment where it's okay to be agile? It's okay to go, look, we put this tool in, we tried it out, didn't quite work, we're going to throw it away. Right? How do you build a safe environment where you can try safely, and have an environment where you can set that up and have that acceptance from the board down? And it's an interesting challenge, but again, it's that people and culture aspect.
Yeah, and I think leaders just have to lead by example with that stuff, right? So if the leaders are getting up and talking about things that have gone wrong, then that encourages everyone else to.
Great.
I often use this phrase whenever I'm drafting or I'm talking about any project. Add data as a metric in your work. So at the end, like if we are the data people, we are talking about facts, we should add that in our own project. So often it gets objected, I'll be honest, but it gives that piece that, you know, at least you are calculating that initially I took X amount of hours to do, now I'm taking X amount. So whenever I'm doing POCs and things like that, I often push to have a data metric as a way to weigh things up. Otherwise it gets very tricky, and then you often forget, like you just go on expanding. In POC it almost becomes like a project, and then you never get to that stage. But I often try to add that as my metric of comparison, where we were at and now where we want to be. So yeah.
Perfect. I did the exact same thing, Bhavika. Every single initiative, every mini project, program of work, or even sort of an initiative that my team work on, I always try and get them to capture how long did this take before and how long does it take now. Also, which team are impacted. So it takes people along the journey. Was marketing impacted, customer services, claims teams, for example, and getting that entire enterprise-wide view. And also considering risk, right? Quite often you'll be doing things that will have a risk buy down or help with compliance. And you might, like one of the biggest returns on investment with one of our initiatives we had was actually a risk and compliance, but automated some high risk processes, right? And we quite a significant, you know, we've had up to 100 time savings on some initiatives because we measure that and track it. We can be guilty as data people not measuring things, but good that you mentioned that.
This is such a good discussion. We've got around 10 minutes left, and I really wanted to ask the panel, what's the biggest piece of advice that you'd like to give our audience today?
Or I'll go first if you want. I mean, I've already sort of talked about it enough, but I'll say it again, right? So if you're not worried about ethics and responsibility and risk management of your like data-driven systems, if you're not yet suitably worried, you should be. So you need to get worried about that topic. Most failures that I've seen are probably best characterized not as bad intent, but just accidents or oversights or just not thinking through fully enough what could have gone wrong. And so you don't, if you sit there going, well, our culture's fine, we're trying to do the right thing, we're trying to improve customer outcomes, surely that's sufficient. No, it's not sufficient at all. You need to get a lot more serious and a lot more detailed about considering ethics and risk management of your systems. A lot of the pitfalls are quite technical. So for technical people, for data people, that's a wonderful world, right? That means you can offer a lot of value on how to solve these sorts of problems. So that's good. And there's a world out there developing standards and frameworks and what have you, which if you want to get involved in policy debate and things like that, there's ample opportunity now for people to do that. So that's, I guess, my biggest piece of advice is get interested in that topic. Educate your business on some of the things that can go wrong and how to manage those risks if you're not already doing that, and contribute to the broader sort of societal debate that's ongoing.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. Bhavika, what about you? What advice would you like to give our audience today?
Never stop learning and exploring, because we are in data. There's often new things coming up, and right now what I've seen is governance risk is the focus. At the same time, we have so many tools coming out, and keeping up with a lot of these things, you need to have that curiosity and that brain to learn and adapt to new things. So that's my piece. Never stop learning and exploring if you want to enjoy your job and be in this data analytics world.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Brett, what advice would you like to give our audience?
Well, as well as just seconding Bhavika's conversation about curiosity is critical, the other piece of advice I would give is to really make sure you understand the business value of the work you do. Because if you understand that, you can explain stuff, you can drive things, you can get people to listen. As data professionals, we often get caught up in, as I said, the business of data, and it's a very important role, but it's there to support a bigger outcome, which is the value to the business. So if you know what that value is, you're going to find it damn so easy to sell what you're trying to do across the organization.
Terrific. Thank you. And Gladwin, what advice would you like to give the audience?
So one, I'll add on to Brett's point and an earlier point he made around the blurring between digital and data now. And I actually saw a quote from a chief data officer from America, and I really liked the quote, which was, data supports digital, and digital supports the business to reach its objectives, right? And making sure you have that alignment across all of those, and exactly like Brett said, is ensuring you have that business focus, because then there's a huge focus in digital. But my quote was always, you can't do digital without data, but that clearly lines the entire almost data value stream. But then wrapping everything we've covered off today is that people focus, right? And this is one of the things I personally look for in the leaders that we were selecting for the top 100 analytics leaders, was what are data leaders and data professionals doing for their team members, their other team members across the business, to help empower. We touched upon the curiosity, right? Support, upskill, and return, sort of essentially retain your most valuable asset, which is your people. Right? You can't have great client experience at the front without your people. And to summarize again, is being transparent and saying it's not easy, right? All of the things we've talked about sound really great at a high level, but it's not easy, and things are always going to take longer than you thought they did, because you're going to have to take everyone on the journey, right? If you could just do it on your own, you think it'd be quicker, right? But probably you have a big, fall in its face. And I'll finish up with an African proverb I often use, right? Which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's it from me.
Gladwin, it's really interesting you say it. I'd like to also just sort of reinforce that really heavily and go, the conversation we often have is there's a lot of material about data management, data governance, the data book of knowledge. There's tomes of data. And in some respects, you could think data management could become an engineering process. And the key thing about an engineering process is you put an input in and you get a predictable outcome out. I think we all know in data management that doesn't work. Why? because the fundamental resource we're working on is people, and people are not a predictable material. So if you don't look at the culture, then you're not going to get the outcomes that you're trying to get to.
Fantastic. I'm so pleased that we all joined up for this panel today. Is there any final comments anybody wants to impart to the audience? We've done very well. We've covered a lot of ground. Well, thank you so much. That does bring us to the end of the panel. I would like to thank all of our panelists, Gladwin Mendez from Fisher Funds, Abhavika Andutkat, who is from Energy Australia, Brett Wooley from QBE Insurance, and Chris Dolman from IAG. Now, that is all that we have time for. I really, really loved hearing that great discussion. Now, remember, you can still download your own copy of the Top 100 Innovators in Data and Analytics 2022 report. Also, many of our top 100 members are going to be appearing at our events online and in person over 2022. So be sure to have a look at our global events calendar to ensure that you can get a chance to see them. So it's a bye for now from me, but stay safe and stay well. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I'd really like to thank our panel. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.